Hi, everybody. Welcome to It's All Right with Suzette, a half-hour show on the craft of writing. And I'm your host, Suzette Martinez Standring. And today our topic is biography. Ross Perot. Does it ring a bell? He ran for president as an independent against George Bush and Bill Clinton in 1992 and lost. But this is how he wins today. His colorful life and astounding stories are captured in a page-turning book written by author Dave Lieber, who is a senior columnist with the Dallas Morning News, where he writes a national award-winning investigative column as the Watchdog. Today, we're going to talk about his new book, Searching for Perot, My Journey to Discover Texas's Top Family. Welcome, Dave, and thanks for beaming in from your Yankee Cowboy Ranch in Dallas, Fort Worth. I hear that your 1,000 copies of your book arrived just today.
It's actually 2,000. So.
Oh, well, hold it up and let's take a look.
Yeah, it's like as close as a man can come to giving birth, you know. There's no pain really compared to a woman's childbirth, but it's just it's like it wasn't here yesterday and now it's here today and it'll be the rest of my life, you know.
I love it. I love it. Now, I have to tell you and everyone out there that your book absolutely enthralled me. And that's an unusual word to use regarding a Texas industrialist who lost a presidential election in 1992. But he was so much more than that. And I feel for myself that your book filled a deep need in me these days. And that is a person who was all about doing things right. So tell us about Ross Perot's life that will something about it that will compel others to read your book.
Well, I had no idea when I moved here that he was the giant figure that he was, because I grew up in New York, you know, and I'd worked in the Northeast and in different states. So when I got here, I realized that this guy was a really powerful, incredible figure, but I didn't know all the little stories about it. But when he died a couple of years ago, the outpouring of love and grief was so vast and deep. I'd never really witnessed anything like it for a non-politician type person that I figured, what is going on here? And I began to learn about him. And I learned, for example, that he's just helped thousands of people and never ever talked about it. And, you know, just got involved in a lot of trouble. Loved to make trouble for the establishment, would do that any which way he could, which is near to our own hearts, you know, the political establishment, the business establishment, the social establishment. He just broke all the rules. And, you know, we don't really have enough of that. He broke rules in a good way, you know, by helping people. And we don't really have a lot of that in today's society, it seems. So
I was really amazed at how he touched so many people's lives and how he had a strict, a stringent philosophy about doing so much community good and doing things, with the best possible quality. I mean, he was a real visionary. I was surprised to find out that he had a hand in Apple's transformation. In fact, in your book, Steve Jobs is quoted as saying, "It's safe to say that without Ross's help, investment, and service on my board, there might never have been an Apple computer company as we know it today." That's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about his career in technology, where his fortune was made?
Well, he started a computer services business called Electronic Data Systems in like 1962. And before that, he was an IBM salesman. And he went to IBM and he said, "Look, I'm your top salesman and all that, but you're giving people computers, but they don't know how to use them. So why don't we open up a software business where we teach people how to use their software?" And they said, "No, we don't want to do it." So we started this company, EDS, and it became, a giant company because it got the Medicare and Medicaid contracts for states when Medicare and Medicaid were passed as part of the Great Society. And so he was like the guy that really started the whole computer services industry, which now, of course, is just absolutely huge and it's everywhere. And he would make up the number. He'd say, "You owe me $5,128." And they'd go, "Well, how do you know?" And he goes, "Because I figured it out." But he would just pick these numbers out of the air just to make it look like he knew what he was doing. But he was making all the rules. And he never had a computer of his own, but yet he was kicked out of EDS in a very complicated deal, or left with $750 million in his pocket, whichever you want to call it. And when he left EDS, he was a man without a ship. And just like Steve Jobs, when he was kicked out of Apple originally, a man without a ship. So they got together and they invested in each other, really. And Perot became a mentor, helped Steve Jobs with Nextel, and Nextel became the root of Apple when Steve Jobs went back to Apple. And, you know, Perot had a chance to invest with Bill Gates back in the early days of Microsoft. He turned it down and he said, "I'm not going to make that mistake again." So I think he bought about 16% of Nextel and he got a seat on the board. But yeah, nobody remembers that. I didn't remember any of that.
Well, this is what I loved about your book. It was story after astounding story of these kind of accomplishments, but you write it in a way that is very engaging and easy to read. And well, you are a master storyteller. Um, and I was surprised to find out how way even back in the day, he had visions about, digital town halls. And in 2000, his residential development Heritage was the first online community built to allow its residents to network with each other via home computers. I mean, that was pretty innovative back then.
Yeah, that was his son, Ross Perot Jr.
Oh,
who
his son,
Yeah,
that's right.
who basically is a mega developer and developing billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of business all around the world right now. It's astounding. And he's the one that came up with the idea of, we'll tether all the all the residents together in one homepage, so they can all get together and they can go to school, they can do shopping, they can watch their kids through cameras in the playground. I mean, this was the year 2000, and a lot of people didn't even have email back then, and they were planning this online community, and they are ahead of most people because they hire the brightest people and come up with these really amazing ideas.
Well, that's true. That's very clear. He always went for the top people. And I particularly was drawn to their approach about real estate because it wasn't just about construction. It was about creating communities and how the Pro family found ways to bring neighbors together and to, create these bonding experiences. And you lived in one of those places, didn't you?
Yeah, I lived in Ross Perot Jr.'s first master plan community, and I called it Perotville. And it was sort of a recreation, a Disney World recreation of what Perot Sr. had grown up in Texarkana during the Depression, in a perfect little town with. So I had a little church with a big steeple in my community. I had trails, like the biggest park system in all of Fort Worth, Texas. Um, I had the YMCA, and it was all like the little perfect community, which is the exact opposite of what I grew up within Manhattan, where I come from. And
But
so it
didn't
was a fantasy land.
but didn't they also have huge, parties and things like that? They actually paid for themselves.
Yeah, every holiday, the Perot people made sure that we had an Easter Bunny, Easter parade. We had a Thanksgiving run. We had Christmas with Santa. We had Halloween costume contests. I mean, we had, like I said, Easter egg drop. We had parades. I mean, and they ran it, and they brought their videographer with them, and they always filmed it to show the prospective buyers, what it was like to live in this vanilla, community. I mean, I'd lived in the rough and tumble world of Philadelphia before I got here in Texas 28 years ago, and I just needed a place where I could just go hide, and that Peroville provided it for me because, it was the exact opposite of everything I had ever seen in my life previously.
Well, what I really was so impressed with was the leadership of Ross Perot Sr. He really set a stage and loved his children and role modeled how things had to be, number one, community given priority, doing things for the best of all. And also about how adventurous and out of the box he was, and what made him so beloved, which was his attention to detail and his incredible leadership capability, was also his curse because he had to be 100% in charge. and he had to be his vision or no vision. And one of my favorite parts of the book is about Operation Hotfoot. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So around 1979, he was in his company, EDS, was in Iran, and they were charged with creating a social security system like ours for the Iranian people. And things got really rough when the Shah of Iran, the Shah was basically, he was excluded. He was kicked out, excommunicated from Iran. And the Ayatollah Khomeini came in from France. And then all hell broke out. And most of Perot's people had left Iran, except there were two. Those two guys were taken hostage. They were put in a prison. And so Perot decides he tries all the channels. He goes to Henry Kissinger and he goes to the State Department and he tries every which way to get him out. And nobody will help because they're all in turmoil in Iran because there's rioting in the streets. So he personally goes to Iran, which is, he even admits, is nuts, because they would love to have a billionaire like him, an American capitalist, as a hostage or something. But he goes there, he checks it out. He hires a phenomenal army officer, retired, named Bull Connor. And then they organized 10 corporate commandos from his EDS company, guys who are now in their 40s, who were in the army, years ago, but now are like fathers and husbands. And he takes these 10 guys over to Iran, and they hatch a plot to pull these two guys out of the prison. And it works. And NBC turns it into a mini series where Richard Crenna plays Ross Perot, and Ken Follett writes a best-selling book about it called The Wings of Eagles. And then right after that, the American hostages are all taken in the American embassy, and they're in there for 444 days. So Ross Perot looks like a genius because he was able to get his people out, but our country couldn't get our people out after, just like he did.
I thought it was just an incredible story. And I think what really moved me so much in that particular chapter was the way you wrote about all the advice that he was being given against the idea, how many laws he was breaking by doing this, and how he was trying to get his own little commando unit together to break these people out of prison and all the rest of it. And, it really kind of brings to life how some of these decisions that leaders make are so difficult, and how many naysayers and doomsday people there are. And yet it was amazing to me that he still bowled his way forward. Like, no, we're getting him out, and I've got this great idea. And he had all the best people working for him. And it actually happened. I thought that was really an exciting chapter.
Yeah.
Now,
go ahead. And he basically said, if this had failed, I would be the biggest dunce in the world. And instead, Prince Charles came over and gave him the Winston Churchill Medal in honor of what he had accomplished. So it could have gone either way.
I mean, can you imagine the kind of, strength of character it takes to say, I've just got this vision and I'm going to make it happen, even though it goes against the odds. And for a fact that if you fail, you're going to be, like the world idiot for the rest of your life. And yet he breaking people out of an Iranian prison, that's amazing. I so enjoyed that chapter. Your book is about family legacy, and it had to have been a challenge for his son to follow in his father's footsteps. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you had to write about that?
Well, when I got here, the big character wasn't Ross Perot Sr., it was Ross Perot Jr., who back then was a 36-year-old mega developer who owned 22,000 acres, which is larger than my Manhattan. And he was going to put and has put in communities, cities all over. I live real close to this ranch that he owns, the Circle T, which is 2,000 acres. And he's put Fidelity in there, Schwab and Deloitte. And then he took this whole program that he developed around the world, and he's doing it in England, and he's doing it in Florida, he's doing it in California, he's doing it in Europe. And I've never seen anybody, do this before. As a longtime newspaper man, I covered developers, that build strip shopping centers, basically, right? And this guy's building strip shopping centers times a million. He has a Facebook plant that he bought out here, which is 1.5 miles long. He brought Texas Motor Speedway nearby, which had seating for 200,000, which when it opened was the largest outdoor arena in the world. And there's just no stopping him. I mean, he basically brings in jobs, so many jobs, that Fort Worth, Texas is now the 12th largest city in the country. And it's all because of his development, because he's bringing in factories and offices and retail, and then he creates the housing to go with it. And all of this stuff is really high quality.
It's amazing,
Really
Dave.
good.
Right now, we're going to have to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to be talking to Dave Lieber about his book, Searching for Perot, and his creative process. You're looking at a man who does it all: investigative journalism, national speaking, and a playwright. And we're going to touch upon that later on. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back with you. And welcome back, everybody, to It's All Right with Suzette, with our special guest author, Dave Lieber, who wrote the page-turning book, Searching for Perot. You know, Dave, I always want to say, waiting for Godot, and I wondered if that had something to do with your title when you chose.
It did.
It did. I thought so. Yeah. Well, anyway, the wait is over. So now let's go on about, Ross Perot and politics.
Okay.
I'm really interested in that. You know, he decided that he was going to be an independent, and he actually captured, what was it, 18% of the national vote or something?
Yeah, 19.
Right. And so tell us a little bit about, that. I mean, he's looked upon as a big political disruptor, but after reading your book, I realized how motivated he was to try to reach the greatest number of citizens with the greatest amount of good in his heart, even though he had, a really a pretty, what would you say, a pretty demanding style.
Yeah. Well, Suzette, he dazzled America. I mean, he came up by storm in '92. He went on the Larry King show on CNN and announced that he would throw his hat in the ring if Americans in 50 states got him on the ballot. And it launched a movement which we had never seen before or since, where he got on the ballot in 50 states because volunteers all over the country did it. So he's killing it in the polls. He's actually beating Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush the first in polls, early polls. And he gets a lot of press criticism because he doesn't have a public record. So they go into his business dealings and they dig up stuff that they think is really making him look bad. And some people thought it did, but it wasn't that scandalous stuff. It was just the kind of stuff business people do in the harsh hardball world. And then all of a sudden he decides he can't take it anymore and he drops out of the race, which surprised everybody, including his family. And so he's gone for a few months, and then he comes back in early October. So there's only 1 month left, and he knocks it out of the park in the presidential debates. They let him on the debate stage with those two guys, and so he ends up with 19%, and he would have gotten way over 20 if he hadn't dropped out. But he was an amateur politician, so he really was in over his head, and he knew it.
Well, one of the things that caught my eye was that it talked about one of the reasons why he quit was because he said that the Republicans were trying to dig up dirt against his daughter, and they were going to release dirt right before her wedding, and he didn't want to put her through that.
Yeah, and that story has kind of been debunked by different people that have looked into it. And so I mention it in the book, but I don't really know that that's the real reason.
Okay.
It's the person who told him that his children were going to be embarrassed. They were all grown adults at that point. Basically recanted that story later on. But I think he was just overwhelmed with all the negative attention that he was getting because he was taking on the establishment in every which way. And so he didn't have a lot of friends except for those hundreds of thousands of people on the ground who were working to get his name on the ballots as an independent.
Mm-hmm. The story of the father and son are so intertwined in all of their accomplishments, and it seemed, I think it would have been hard. Junior, his son, accomplished an amazing, so much, really, just like his father. But I think he had kind of a harder time, it seemed, in the press or in the media. Is that so, Dave?
Yeah, Junior, got into his controversies, but then so did Senior. That's part of who the Perots are, is they jump into situations that most people wouldn't because they really believe they can win. Junior is a former Air Force pilot, so he basically says, it's a win or die. It's not win or lose, it's win or die. And so they fight really hard for what they believe in, incredibly hard. And, but the results speak for themselves.
Now, your book is going to be made into a play. So can you tell us about the Ross Perot play that you're planning?
Yeah, I wrote the play first, and we're talking to a couple of theaters that it would debut in Dallas County in February, and in Tarrant County, where Fort Worth is, in March. So that's in the works, and that's a whole different story because that's Ross Perot Sr.'s story as he goes on the way to heaven, and he has to justify his life. Whereas
That's
my book is
great.
more about how I had to cover this family and what it was like to cover billionaires, for the newspaper and deal with them and watch what they did and how they did it.
Hmm. Hmm. And you're no stranger to being a playwright because you've written a play, Amen, the Ultimate Texan, and a companion book of the same name. And the 21st Annual Column Awards chose Amen as the best new play by a local playwright in Dallas-Fort Worth. And also fans at BroadwayWorld.com selected Amen as a play of the decade. So you're always covering these larger than life Texans.
Yeah, for a New York boy, what I learned was that Texans love their folk heroes. So Amon Carter owned the TV station here, the radio station, and the newspaper all at the same time for almost 50 years, and ran this town with an iron grip, and died 2 years before Ross Perot went to Dallas in '57. But Texans love their heroes. They love, like in football, they love Tom Landry, the former coach of the Cowboys, and they love Roger Staubach, the quarterback, and they love Nolan Ryan, the pitcher. And they love their hometown movie stars, like Larry Hagman, grew up in Weatherford. And so they honor. And that's why I think if I'm going to do another play, a Texas biography, I'm thinking about Barbara Jordan, because she really was just like these guys in terms of being a role model and a rule breaker. But the Texans love to honor, like they love the Alamo guys, Travis, Bowie, and Crockett. You just don't find this in any other state. It's just hero worship. And Perot has so many fans that would, just love to enjoy him and bring him back to life, just like Amon Carter had so many fans, because everything is named after Amon Carter in Fort Worth, and there's an awful lot named after Perot over in Dallas.
Mhm. Well, I have to tell you, having grown up in San Francisco, I really didn't know that much about Perot, other than he was portrayed as like this terrier and, arrogant and, a disruptor. But now after reading your book, I just have such great respect for him. I mean, and especially written by you, Dave, because, you're the watchdog for the Dallas Morning News. You're not exactly known for being complimentary. You're hard, you're investigative. You tell it like it is. You're always uncovering corruption. You're not one to flatter. But and the book comes across like, yes, they're both of the Perot family are very human, but wow, the things that they were able to accomplish, it was so inspiring. So I have to tell you, I was doing a little research and I found out that this writer by the name of Harrison Politico said that Ross Perot was the father of the whole kind of Trump, style. And I found that to be so offensive now after having read your book, because he might have been a political disruptor, but he was honestly a good man.
Yeah, I mean, he helped, and he was assigned to be the chairman of the Naval Honor Code Writing Committee at the Naval Academy. He was in charge of writing the Honor Code, which exists today. And although he had his ethical lapses in his business competitions with other companies as they vied for business, he really did want to play by the rules, and he believed in the military. He believed in America. He was one of the biggest patriots this country has ever produced.
Mhm.
And he would not have, appreciated the way Trump behaved at all. And he never acted like that. he scolded the press and said, "You guys write what you want and you'll get your bonuses and get promoted. I don't care." And that was as far as his fake news, argument went with the press.
Mhm, mhm. Well, it was really a great book, Dave. And I'm kind of curious about your process because, you've gone from columnist and author and teacher of, you're a corporate strategist for corporate storytelling. So what is your process and how did you, segue into playwriting?
Well, I read this book about Amon Carter 25 years ago, and I told the author of the book that I wanted to turn it into a play because there were so many phenomenal scenes. And he said, "You'll never get to do it because Amon Carter's daughter will shut down any theater that wants to do it." I go, "How could she?" And he goes, "Well, she gives the money through the foundation, all the theaters." So I asked Amon Carter's daughter, "Is that true?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, it's kind of true, but don't worry, my mother won't live forever." And when the daughter did pass on, I did write the play, and I had waited over 20 years because the daughter, protected the image of her father and wouldn't let anybody, get involved in it. And so I just saw that this had scenes that I could turn into a play. And then I saw the same thing with Perot because I saw the eulogy that Junior gave at his father's funeral, which was the most moving eulogy I've ever witnessed in my life. And I decided to reverse engineer the eulogy back in time as far as I could go with the family. We haven't talked about the grandfather who gave birth to Senior, but he was also an incredible man who was a phenomenal father and taught his son all these great business principles. So that's
Well,
how it came about.
and I think that it's interesting that, you write this book with so many astounding chapters about things that he accomplished, he and his son accomplished in their lifetime. But your play is going to be about Ross Perot going to heaven and justifying his entrance, which I think is going to be pretty cool. And, we have a couple of minutes left. And first of all, how do we buy your book, Dave?
Oh, perotbook.com. Perot, Perot, book.com.
Now, you're not selling it on Amazon. You're selling it directly.
Yeah, I don't want to give Jeff Bezos any money right now. I'm a little ticked off at what he does to authors. And so I boycott Amazon. So just go to perotbook.com where it's on sale off the cover price. Suzette, before I go, I just want to tell people that I wrote a lot of this book looking at you because you organized this writing space where columnists could get together for 3 hours a week. And in a Zoom room, we'd all sit and write, but none of us would ever talk, but we just were accountable to each other. So I would spend 3 hours a week for months, in the Zoom room with you, not talking, but looking at your picture as I sat and worked on this book. And I really owe you and all the other writers in that room a note of thanks, because I don't think I would have had the discipline to sit down with everything else going on in the world right now and actually work on this.
Oh, Dave, that means so much to me. I respect you so much. And it's just been such a fun time and an honor to be able to feature you on the show today. And, we have 1 minute left. Do you have any kind of words of inspiration for writers who want to know about your process or your best advice?
Well, it really is a difficult thing to do. And, you have to really put your butt in the chair and force yourself. And for me, organization is the key. I spend just as much time organizing it all as I do writing it. So the writing is easy because I'm organized. That's really been my secret to getting all this work done.
Well, I remember years ago, you said that whenever you have a subject that interests you, you'll just cut out articles and put them into a file. And
Right.
later on, you have this collection of information that you can write about, in a kind of a collective, cumulative kind of sense on a subject. And I thought that was pretty brilliant. Well, our time is up. And Dave Lieber, I want to thank you for being with us today. Everybody go to perotbook.com. Right, Dave? Perotbook.com. And make sure you get your copy of Searching for Perot. Thanks for being on the show, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everybody.